Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. Scams have always been a hot topic. As technology gets more sophisticated, Kiwis of all ages are becoming vulnerable to falling for them. Estimates of how much money we've lost varies, though one NetSafe and Global Anti-Scam Alliance report estimated over $2 billion was lost last year alone. So what has been done to try and solve this crisis? And do banks and the government need to take more responsibility? NZ Herald senior reporter Lane Nichols joins us today on The Front Page to discuss the latest scammers and what solutions there could be. First off, Lane, you've been covering scams and banking extensively for years now. It feels like you've become the country's leading journalist in this space. What got you into it?
Well, it was accidental, really. I was assigned a story about a guy that had lost $136,000, just disappeared from his bank account down in South London, and I got talking to him, and it really just snowballed. I mean, it's one of those things where you start writing about something and people start writing into you saying the same thing happened to me, but only worse. Yeah, I just it became a bit of a fixation and a 2.5-year project.
Since you began covering this round, how has the world of scamming, I guess, evolved? So we always think about scams like that. Some Nigerian prince is sending us an email because we've won some money,
Yes.
or we've won some money and we can send our bank details through and stuff. But how sophisticated are they now?
Well, I mean, it's constantly changing. It's a landscape that's just ever evolving. People describe it as whack-a-mole. You know, one gets stamped out and then a new one springs up. The technology aspect with AI, which is starting to come into things. I've done stories about AI deep fakes. One of Christopher Luxon apparently telling pensioners that they should invest in cryptocurrency. A woman lost $250,000 to it. It's incredible how skilled the scammers are as manipulators. And how talented they are at what they do. You've moved on from things like text scams, which you still get, people sending out malicious links that will download software onto your computer and send all your login details, your banking back to someone wherever they are, people being cold called, right through to deep fakes. It's constantly changing. Who knows what's around the corner?
And it's scary as well, because if your voice or your face is on the internet, then it can potentially be used for, I've heard the stories about, mothers getting calls from their kids who live overseas, and it's their voice asking her for money for an emergency. I mean, it's just insane.
It's terrifying. How do you know what's real and what's not? And that's only going to get harder, I would imagine, as things go forward.
There's a huge emotional toll on victims, obviously. What are some of the commonalities that you've seen through the victims that you've spoken to?
It's funny you ask that. I was going back through my dictaphone recently and listening to, because I had to delete and make some space. And I was listening to interview after interview with people who had lost their life savings, listening to what they've been through and the emotional toll, the embarrassment, the shame, the financial stress that's put them under. But just the worst thing was their loss in trust in humanity, really. How do you trust anyone ever again when someone that you believe to be honest and helping you has swindled you for everything you've got?
What are some of the most common reasons banks use to deny liability, I suppose?
Well, as it stands, banks have to refund you if it was an unauthorised fraud. If someone's got into your bank account or accessed your credit card details and stolen your money. Where it becomes difficult, where it has become difficult, is when it was an authorised fraud, the sort of thing. If it's a romance scam, or if it was an investment scam where you've been tricked into thinking you're sending your money to a bank for a bond investment, or helping out your lover who's stuck on an oil rig off the coast of Alaska. And you've sent that money yourself. In those cases, the banks tend to deny liability unless there are really obvious red flags that the banks should have picked up, that they were on notice that the customer was being scammed and they could have stepped in. Then they can be taken to task by the banking ombudsman. But the cases I've looked at, that very rarely happens.
Yeah. So, what are some of the main barriers for people trying to get their money back?
Well, most of the time, the money's been whisked offshore,
Yeah.
and once it goes offshore, the police tend to throw their hands up and say, "Look, it's too difficult. We don't have jurisdiction. You're on your own." What police tend to do is go for the low-hanging fruit, which is the domestic money mules whose accounts have been used to receive the money, transfer it overseas to the scammers. Those ones are a little bit easier for police to identify and to prosecute, but that leaves the ringleaders, who are generally offshore, free just to carry on doing what they're doing.
There's been big buildings that we've highlighted before. Tucked away on one of the floors could be one of these scam call centers. A lot of these scammers, especially the bosses, they will go create side businesses with that dirty money to make it look as if they created a legitimate company. They're moving more towards these, they call them safe houses, where you can have a call center group that's got 100 scammers in it, but they're in 5 different locations. Because if one location gets hit, then the other one's shut down.
I've heard of stories of there being warehouses of people just in front of laptops doing this kind of thing. I think I read about it in a sense of romance scams. So it's obviously a huge money-making business overseas.
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the ways that people can be, I guess, vigilant?
The difficulty is these people are so convincing. One person described it to me as being like they were wrapped up in a security blanket, and the person did most of the talking, had answers for every question that he might have before he'd even answered it. And people are just disarmed, and they've stopped suspecting. If you're cold called, for instance, you got to be really careful. You don't know who this person is. You better to hang up, take the number, and then go and find the agency or the organisation they're ringing from, find them on the website and look them up and call them yourself, and double check that the person who's calling you is who they say they are.
What are some of the cases you've covered so far this year that show that things aren't necessarily improving?
Cases that I covered this year, there was a woman who lost $550,000. She had rung the bank. The bank had helped her send the money to an account at another bank, and the name of that account was a known mule account that the bank that was sending the money had already been on notice of and was involved in a previous scam. Unfortunately, she hasn't got her money back, and that's been investigated by the banking ombudsman. Another really interesting case I've been looking at is a fellow, a pensioner in Mount Roskill, who sent $158,000 back from his UK bank account to his New Zealand Westpac account. When he keyed it in the numbers, he made one-digit mistake, and the money was sent to another account at Westpac belonging to a woman who gratefully received the money and never gave it back. He, in the end, after our coverage, was refunded by Barclays Bank in the UK, got a full refund, and the woman and her partner are now before the courts, accused of receiving stolen money and refusing to return it.
Several of your stories highlight cases where banks failed to spot those glaring red flags. Are there any ways that, I guess in the last few years, that they're trying harder to spot them?
Yeah, to be fair, the banking sector has stepped up, partly under the threat of regulation by the government, but they are making changes, and they have implemented changes. They've brought in a confirmation of payee system, where if you're sending money, you can now check that the account name that you're receiving it to matches the account that you think it is. A lot of the people I've written about, if that had been in place, they wouldn't have lost their money. Banks have stopped sending out text messages to customers, which confuse people and they think it could be a scam. They have introduced a system now where they are going to start refunding authorised frauds, people who've lost money to investment scams and the like. If the bank has failed to meet some basic obligations. And the government's just announced a new alliance between all sorts of organisations which have skin in the game around scams: banks, telecommunication companies, NetSafe, the Financial Markets Authority, all of these organisations which are now trying to share more information and stamp out scams as they emerge and try and prevent people losing their money.
From your investigations, what kind of preventative steps do you believe banks should be implementing, but I guess haven't yet?
Well, a lot of the cases I've seen, people have made a very unusual series of transactions which were completely at odds to their history of banking. And I think there needs to be better systems, algorithms that pick up those really unusual transactions and put a halt on it, put a bit of friction in the system. That the trouble is that slows things down, and customers these days want to be able to have everything happening immediately. But personally, I would rather take a phone call from a bank employee and say, "Hey, this doesn't look right. Is this you? Have you authorised this payment?" Rather than lose $200,000 to scammers.
Well, because sometimes they do that. If you're like, I don't know, if there's some charges in Croatia or something, and it can see that I've gone to Countdown yesterday.
I had that recently.
Did you?
Yeah, I got scammed. Yeah.
How?
Well, I don't know how, but someone managed to find my bank account details, and all of a sudden I had a series of transactions from Canada going out for petrol for some pharmacy, and $450 had disappeared.
They obviously didn't know who they were dealing with.
But to their credit, I raised the issue with ASB. ASB looked into it and they refunded me the money because it was an unauthorised fraud. So I appreciated that.
Yeah. So if there's some kind of AI or some like algorithm, like you said, that says, "Oh, Chelsea doesn't usually shop at hunting and fishing," but there are, I don't know, I'm just thinking of the places where I wouldn't be usually seen. Yeah. Then something similar, that would be a good idea.
Well, banks do have that. And, to their credit, they are investing a lot of money in this space. They really pulled out all stops on advertising campaigns recently to try and educate customers. But you do get the feeling that it's a little bit too late, certainly for a lot of the people I've written about. And some of this might not have happened hadn't it been for the government stepping in and warning they were going to wave a big stick.
If you've always thought that you would never get scammed, you're not alone, because so many people think that they're not going to get scammed until they get scammed. Like my colleague James's wife, Michelle, what happened?
We bought some shoes online and they were supposed to be Doc Martens. When they arrived, not Doc Martens, they're these teeny tiny things.
Were there signs?
There were red flags waving all over the show, but I said go for it because I wanted the conversation to end.
Thinking back on all of the people that you've spoken to, I know that each case is individual. Are there any that stick out to your mind that when you're trawling through those banking ombudsman reports, which I can only assume are very, very long, and is there anything that sticks out to you that makes you keep going?
Everyone is different, but there's been some real tales of heartache and a lot of tears on the phone. One that really sticks with me is a Spanish fellow from Whangarei, Borja Ares, who's a lovely guy. He lost a very, very large sum of money when he was swindled by I think it was the Citibank scam that was going around. And when he talked to me about his loss and what he'd gone through and his family, he told me that he felt he had failed his wife. And that was really hard to hear. Fortunately, the banking ombudsman found BNZ was at fault and he received a 70% refund in that case, which was great. But like I say, a lot of people aren't so lucky.
What changes do you think are urgently needed in the banking sector, or even just societally, I suppose?
Well, one thing which I know the banks are working on is trying to share more information about known mule accounts. Mule accounts are people that agree to have receive money into their account and then they are under instructions to send it straight overseas, and it makes it very difficult for police to track where the money's gone. Some of these people have been tricked into having their accounts used. They might be romance victim scams. Some people are just taking a cut and getting some money, and I'm following several of those cases before the courts. But there have been cases where banks have known that they are harbouring a suspect account or a suspect customer. They haven't shared that information with other banks, and these people have been able to go on, open other bank accounts and keep receiving money, and people have lost money. There was one guy who just sold a business. He invested the proceeds, which was $1 million. Turned out it was a scam. He lost a lot. The person who received his money, although it was known because he'd flagged it with police, the victim, he was able to open bank accounts at other banks and go off and steal another $800,000 over the next 9 months. So better information sharing around that sort of thing would be able to protect a lot more people.
And Lane, lastly, how optimistic are you about the future of this sector? And can New Zealand ever be known internationally as somewhere not to, I was going to say fudge with?
At the moment, I'm completely paranoid. Every time I make a bank transfer, I'm terrified I'm going to muck up the number. I'm worried that people are going to get into my bank account and steal more cash. And I worry for a lot of other people out there who, despite all the warnings, despite all the stories, are still losing their money to scammers. At the moment, unfortunately, New Zealand is behind the 8 ball. When you look at us compared to Australia and compared to the UK, for instance, our protections are not as advanced as some of those countries. There is work underway to bring that up to standard, and I applaud that. And I'm hopeful that can continue at pace, so we can get up and be on par with some of those countries that we like to compare ourselves with.
Thanks for joining us, Lane.
You're welcome.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Ethan Sills and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.